Thanks, Steve. First, I have to begin with a correction so I don't get in trouble with Dylan. I'm not the CEO of Voyager. I'm president of International and Space Stations, which is an awkward title. I mean, president of International, and Space Stations. And when I sold Nanoracks to Voyager, Dylan asked me to stay on for a few years. And he said, how about president of International? And I thought about it. And the next day I went back and said, and Space Stations. And he goes, why? I said, because there will be an RFP from NASA for free flyers, and we will be one of the winners. And I'm an extremely pessimistic human being when it comes to space. I mean, if you've been in it, Courtney, for a while, you don't burst with optimism. But I knew we would be one of the winners because of how hard Nanoracks and so many in the community. I knew there would be an RFP, and that's what I want to talk about this morning, is how we got to the point where we're on the cusp of something, for me, and I think for all of us, extraordinary. We've seen the buildup of the space transportation to where you can use the words robust, reliable, and where are they going? And so now we're entering an era of private space stations, and that's what Steve asked me to talk about, and a little bit of how we got here, we got to this point. So important word, return. Because, as Steve mentioned, I'd like to think that the work we did with the Mir space station was the first commercial space station. So I wanted to begin looking a little bit back. I mean, at Voyager, Dylan Taylor, the CEO, is a great believer, as I am, in Gerard O'Neill's entire effort in the 70s for space settlements. And it was really Gerard O'Neill. How many people here know Professor O'Neill? Oh, yeah, so thank you. It's remarkable because he was once quite famous. He was a celebrity, and he was one of the first who said, look, it's about more than the hardware. As humanity, we can go and live in space. And in fact, it was Gerard O'Neill who sent me to Moscow my second time out of the Space Studies Institute. And a very visionary man, came very close to succeeding in the commercial world. And his vision was not one of hardware. In fact, the cardinal mistake he made was he really based it on the space shuttle. But one of the points I want to make this morning is his vision was humanity would find itself. We would be better as a species living and working in space. And where did that begin? Okay, it's hard to read this, but this is a drawing of Tchaikovsky, Konstantin Tchaikovsky, the partially deaf school teacher who lived in a small town in Russia about 1880 up until about 1930. And it was Tchaikovsky sitting there who came up with the equation that rockets would propel in the vacuum of space, for which later, when Goddard said the same thing, the New York Times ridiculed him. But Tchaikovsky is also known because he was the first to come up with a three-stage launch vehicle. He had the first stage as liquid oxygen, the second stage as a propellant, and the third is the crew. And the other space stations, other things, but what was also remarkable about Tchaikovsky was that he saw it in quasi-religious terms. He thought that, and it was called cosmism, and he felt that in space, again, humanity would find itself. There was something special about space, that as we became a spacefaring species, living on the moon, living in space stations, it would change us for who we are. And so it's important because when we began the space race in the 60s, it was hardware and it was a political orthodoxy. It wasn't about spirituality. And yet, for those of us who are truly in space stations, it's about creating a home in space. It's creating factories in space. It's not hardware. So I thought I would play, first let's listen to this from Mir Corp days.
The U.S. government spent billions of dollars going to the moon. They got there, and just as they got there, everybody got color television sets, and they got to the moon. It was pretty well black and white.
1972, Apollo 17, last mission on the moon, and during the Nixon administration, shut it down.
We, as Apollo's children, felt we were Apollo's orphans. We had been left out in the cold.
It was over in the government's minds, but a lot of young kids there, myself included, were ready for what was next.
The right chemistry, the right mix, the right matrix of people, of vision, wealth, courage, a little bit of craziness, okay, a whole lot of craziness, teamed up and said, let's go do something important. Let's change the future.
Walt pulled together an ad hoc group of people that he knew, and it wasn't so much a company, it was more kind of entourage.
It was like they came out of a band.
Here we were going to negotiate a deal to open a frontier in a place that felt like a frontier at the time.
Here you had a serious situation to take over the manned space station.
Would you like a space station? Because I think we can get it. We had a mega business plan that was going to grow into probably the biggest business plan ever.
The audacity of leasing a 130-ton space asset and privatizing it is the realm of science fiction.
The pressure was incredible. The Russians were being squeezed hard by the United States government to take the Mir out.
Gus said, "You're a doomed man if you do this. They are going to come after you with everything they got." So first off, I take umbrage at the ad hoc. Okay, it was a good business plan, but I should have said it. I should have set it up better. I thought there was another slide. So after the 70s with Gerard O'Neill, it kind of went nowhere because he based it on the shuttle, and he was unsuccessful in raising funds. And the Soviets and Russians went ahead and they began to develop the Soyuz. And we had Skylab. And people forget today that Skylab came down because the shuttle was late. The plan was not to have it deorbit, but it crashed uncontrolled. So, don't get too mad at other nations when they're struggling to get this right. Our first effort didn't go so well. And so it was a good station, could have lasted far longer, Skylab, but the shuttle was so late that Skylab had to come down. And then the Soviets collapsed, and we a group of us sought to lease. They wanted to buy, I told them you can't do that, but to lease the Russian space station Mir. And it was and you just saw the video from the documentary Orphans of Apollo. It was an effort once again by a group of people to show that it's more than the hardware. Okay, you had a space station in orbit, and I'll touch on the ISS in a moment, but you had a space station in orbit and the idea of deorbiting it seemed to us to be contradictory for what we believe in space exploration. And I was asked to be the CEO of Mir Corp, a Dutch company. The reality is not as dramatic. We did good. We had 179 million in backlog when the Mir station came down because of political reasoning and political pressure. And we had Mark Burnett of Survivor to do a game show with NBC where the winner would go to space. And we had Dennis Tito before he went with Space Adventures to the ISS. We signed and paid us to go to the Mir. We had several research and pharmaceutical companies that had paid us. We had the Murdoch family, not Fox. We had the Murdoch family signing to do weather reporting when there was events. A cosmonaut would stand up and report the news. And finally, political pressure brought it down. But for me, Mir Corp is an extremely important data point of how we got from Space 1.0. We had Orbital Sciences, Space Hab, we had the efforts earlier on Skylab, the U.S. effort, and then we were kind of, nothing was really happening in 1988, 1999. It was just before commercial cargo. We were still struggling with ISS and developing it. And we launched MirCorp, spoke to Elon, spoke to Richard Branson. We showed you could get capital. And what I hope one of the data points was, there were a number of data points out of MirCorp. Number one, that a public-private partnership, we didn't have those words then, but a public-private partnership was possible between an entrepreneurial company and a government agency, in this case, the Russian Space Agency. And we also showed excitement. And I remember there was extraordinary excitement covered in all the American television shows, channels, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and you saw the first buds coming up of what private sector, what commercial could do versus government programs. And another thing was pivot to finding a market. We didn't seek to save Mir to do a game show, okay? That isn't, I mean, it isn't what I got up to do for 30, 40 years. We sought to save the Mir so that we could do pharmaceutical research, so we could do these things. But with the boycott by NASA, the Americans, and the boycott and the force ESA had to go along, we pivoted, and you know what? We showed there was a space tourism market, okay? We showed price points. We showed media and entertainment was interesting. And I think a number of people took from that, as I did, that, you know, this commercial thing may work. So you had the Mir, and then you had commercial cargo, extraordinary evolutionary step in NASA as a customer. We saw NASA as a customer in the shuttle Mir, if you guys remember that, where NASA paid $500 million to the Russians. And then finally, there was political pressure, and Mr. Stad was involved in that to some degree. And I was at Office of Space Commerce, and you set up transportation. And we were able to work with others and make NASA be a customer. And there was a lot of resistance. How can you rely on private sector? And they awarded it finally to two, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences. SpaceX had to sue to get the award. And we saw the value of commercial, and we saw the value in resiliency after Orbital lost, I think it was Orb 3 or something, and then SpaceX blew, and yet we had the resiliency to keep going. And then after that, of course, was private astronauts. And it was another extraordinary struggle. And I remember we were just about there in having it accepted here that we could trust our NASA astronauts on private vehicles. And then I remember it was like, who was it? Neil Armstrong, Stafford, and someone else testified before Congress. Gene Cernan, okay, and it was like Mount Rushmore came to life, okay, and you know, and I'm being asked in the media, what do you think of this? And I was like, these are heroes, these are people important to our history, but this is a different era, and we're moving into a different era, and that was really the trust by NASA in giving their astronauts lives over to the private sector. Was one of those extraordinary developments that really pushed us into the commercial era. And we see the importance of resiliency because, of course, it was awarded to SpaceX and to Boeing, and Boeing has yet to launch. And if we had given it to just one player, the safe player, the aerospace giant, we'd be in the same situation as waiting for the shuttle, Skylab, the same situation we get in all the time, we used to get into with the gaps, and we don't want a gap this time, space station going from ISS to the new era. And so commercial, we all have come to realize that commercial is a pathway that allows us to make sure our space program stays robust. So now we're in and there's a video. Okay, this is our space station. Not my music, not my music. I didn't come up with this. So first off, I think it's the first space video I've seen that has jazz from the 1920s, but that's what Abby, okay, that's what Abby did. So, you know, it was a profound moment when finally the body politic here in this town came to recognize that the ISS would have an end. Okay, it's an extraordinary, important political program, okay? And we've also learned a great deal. We've learned how to run a space station. We've learned how to keep it going. We've learned how to work internationally. We've taken the first steps on solid research, not as good as I think we all wanted. It's the last remaining program we have with the Russians, so it's something very critical, but it's going to come to an end. And after commercial cargo, after commercial crew, it's commercial space stations. And I could not have been more pleased that Nanoracks and then Voyager was chosen as one of the companies. There's 3 teams on CLD, Sierra with Blue, there was Northrop and Voyager, and then you have Axiom attached to the station, building a module. And at first, whereas we're going straight to space station. And you may have heard the news that, it may be on here, maybe not, that Northrop has joined with us. And so, and that's a wonderful, wonderful development because the market is down selecting. We believe that NASA will choose 2 teams in the end. Again, that same resiliency we saw with cargo, we see what we see with cargo, we see with crew. I think that will be I'm very confident that will be the same with the private space stations. And what we and so we've announced our business model is a little different. We're replicating the partnership on that exists on the International Space Station. Canadians, Japanese, the Europeans, unfortunately, or without the Russians. But what we're doing is we're doing it commercially this time. So we formed a joint venture, and we announced that the first equity partner is Airbus. And the joint venture has the incredibly creative name of Starlab LLC or something like that. And Voyager is majority, and Airbus is a minority. But what a difference. Again, the commercial difference. Airbus is not a vendor. They're not getting paid by Voyager and walk away and we reap the benefits. But Airbus is now a shareholder on a 20 or 30-year program. And certainly one can envision, if all goes well, that Airbus, Germany, Europe will benefit and gain commercially as we do as well. Fundamental difference. And finally, so we've seen this progression. I wanted to just share with you, you had the thinkers, 100 years ago saying we're going to change as humanity in space. You had visionaries, and there were not many others, but there were others like Gerard O'Neill with space colonies. Then there was the effort by Mir Corp to make the Mir be not a government space station, but one owned. Mir Corp was a Dutch company, and make it something different. And now we're in this era of there will be at least 2 U.S. stations. Oh, by the way, one of our partners is Hilton. They're designing the crew quarters, and I was there for the first meeting with Hilton. When they found out that we put our astronauts, we attached them to a wall with Velcro in a sleeping bag, and there's a toilet behind a curtain, they could not believe it. One is government, one is commercial. When you fly on Starlab, it will be a Hilton-designed crew quarters. I mean, that's just a fundamental difference. Okay, yeah. For all of us who travel, right? So, we have a great partnership. And then the Science Park is very important. I know I'm running out of time, but Science Park is very important because it's, again, about more than hardware. It's about sustainability. We have to make this work commercially. And we've chosen the Science Park as a business model. Science parks are proven. They bring together companies. They bring together universities. There are trained professionals who know how to take a concept from beginning, research and development, into the marketplace. And it's independent of space agencies as well. And so we see the Science Park as what gives, one of the ways it gives us sustainability in utilization. And then the final thing, and then I'll wrap it up, is that we've done, is okay? Yeah, okay. Okay, so we've always done one space station. We put a space station in orbit. And now what we're thinking is, first off, we have to choose the right orbit. And I had a piece in Space News a couple of weeks ago saying that at Voyager, we're looking at a lower orbit. ISS is the wrong orbit for commercial. It's high. It's more expensive, more fuel. It was chosen for political reasons. I know, I was in the room when we gave it to the Russians so that they could have, use the Soyuz and the Progress vehicles. And so we're looking at something between 38 and 45 degrees. And what we've done is we've issued with this article a public sort of call to all the commercial and sovereign nations. Let's see if we could cluster together. Let's see if we can be in the same orbit. And now you're talking about a space town. And again, it's more than hardware. Now you're talking about sharing up mass. You're talking about sharing, maybe moving from one station to a warehouse. You're talking about facilitating raising of capital because you know you're not single sourced on the supply chain. So for me, what this going commercial means, among many things, is now we can talk about not only having one commercial platform, but maybe co-locating. Maybe we co-locate with VAST and India and whoever else comes along. And so that's one of the things we're looking at long term. But in conclusion, what to say is this is the long arc. We're slowly coming out of being a program into being an endeavor, and everything you heard this morning and you'll be hearing this afternoon is in the trenches. But it's nice to step back once in a while and say, why are we doing this? What's the reason? Are we on the right path? And for once, as pessimistic as I am, I do believe we're on the right path. So thank you.
That's great. Jeff, real quick, one is vintage Manber, just fantastic. Thank you.
That's what you get when you ask me this.
I know.
Yeah.
We bonded almost 40 years ago. We're two New Yorkers from the mean streets, so here we are. One is, I moonlight as your book agent, so I want to make sure that people know that this gentleman is an author of several books.
Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
I had a slide. Wait
well,
a second.
I'm going to do justice to it. So it's called, if you go to Amazon, From Earth to Mars.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
You took it from me.
I did. And the surprising history of the rocket pioneers who launched humanity into space. Yeah. It is a fantastic read. Can easily be gotten on Amazon. Graphic novel. I think you're actually in the book. Great to be
in the
a cartoon.
Yeah, so this is, thank you, Courtney. This is episodes 1 and 2 of the 1920s, before the governments were involved. We were going to be a commercial marketplace, okay? At the start of the 1900s, you had radio, frontier markets, you had cars, you had aviation. They were all, international telephone, they were all frontier markets along with rockets. Go 100 friggin' years later. Guess what? They were all mature except for ours.
There you go.
Okay, and so the contention I'm still writing, going to go all the way up to the present, is the presence of the government made us something different and caused the lack of creativity. And then I just want to plug, on the left is a documentary that Dylan Taylor, I think, is the producer, on Gerard O'Neill. So 2 good sources.
Absolutely great. One quick question. Yeah. In your history, I don't recall you referencing the Industrial Space Facility with Max Vauger and Joe Allen. And if I may, I think that's an example of the system sort of eating its own, if you will. But Max Vauger, for those younger folks, the late Max Vauger was a legendary engineer designer from Mercury all the way up through Shuttle. He and astronaut Joe Allen formed this commercial effort. And just a moment or two on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, very quickly, Courtney. So as the space station, it was first called Freedom, Reagan's Freedom. They promised $8 billion in like 6 years. How did that go? Okay, and so I was asked to join the Reagan administration at the end of the Commerce Department, at the end of the Reagan administration, and we were opposed to Freedom. We were just opposed, and we didn't think it was the right way to go. And so we invited private sector to step forward. And whatever it was, industrial. Yeah, space facility came up, and so did a company called Fairchild. They came up, and we had 2 platforms, And we wanted to give government business to them. And if I may speak openly, yes, I wasn't asking you, Courtney. NASA fought us every step of the way. NASA shut it down. Okay, and that's the way it was in the past. And I couldn't be more proud of especially the younger people in the room, in the community today, who don't know of that era, who don't see NASA as the incredible competitor that it was, who sees now that in America, the free markets, competition that we thrive on, and it's a jungle, it's good and bad, I mean, but it is what we are, has now come to space. And so now we're gonna have 10 space stations over the next 10 years. And some will be domestic, some will be international, and nobody in this room knows how many launch vehicles there are. Okay, and so we'll know how many space stations because they're different than launch vehicles, but we're on the cusp of something very cool. So thank you.